Corinne Dalelio. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Communication, Media, and Culture.
I'm Kristen Fleckenstein. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of English, coming from a linguistics background.
So we are currently working on research looking into how people communicate with each other online and any potential relationship that has to their mindset, whether it's a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, the platforms they use, how often they use them, what they're, we're sort of going at it from different subreddits on Reddit and trying to see, find people who are either engaged in online discussion because they're open to it or not. We're just trying to see where all the variables play out. I'm interested in how people produce knowledge together, how they share knowledge and how they exchange knowledge, and how ultimately the goal is to get us collectively closer to truth. And so that's why we're looking at these debates and discussions that people have, which I think are valuable for that process. I feel like the process that we're interested in studying is a better process for attaining knowledge and truth than AI, which just gives you the most sort of common, most probabilistic, most likely thing that a human would spout out of their mouth in response to that, except for all the mistakes it makes. Better to have people who disagree with each other rather than a single voice which has its own bias, but people who disagree with each other and their biases probe each other, and within that tension we get closer to truth. So
I am coming from kind of a discourse analytic background and looking at how people interact with each other. My particular research has focused on kind of the words that we think of as being throwaway or filler. Often they're literally described as filler words, like so, well, like, those kinds of things.
Which AI has none of.
Yeah, AI is very bad at using language in a naturalistic kind of sense like that. The things that we expect when we hear people speak extemporaneously or when they're just writing off the cuff, AI really doesn't include. And it's probably because its training data is maybe not necessarily super informal conversational text. But I specifically looked at how people use those kinds of discourse markers, things that we think of as filler, for the purpose of positioning, for the purpose of indicating agreement or covertly indicating disagreement or disalignment with specific positions. Those kinds of stances that people take with that, because often people are just like, I disagree with you. Well, online sometimes they are. But in general, we're a little bit cagier and a little bit more covert with how we express those kinds of alignment and disalignment.
We're asking them questions about themselves and their mindset, and then we're going to look at their posts and see if there's any correlation between how they engage with others online. Are they more open? Are they asking more questions? Are they, being more civil? If they have more of a growth mindset, that's kind of the underlying hypothesis that we're testing, and so we're going to see.
The thing about AI is it's really not good at taking critical stances or even hardline stances on things. If you ask it its opinion on things, often it just kind of tries to agree with you. You can tell ChatGPT, I think this, do you agree? And even if it's something wildly outlandish, even if it's something fully leaning into conspiracy spaces, if I said, I think the earth is flat, do you agree? It's never no, you're wrong. It's just kind of well, here's why people think that the earth is not flat. And those kinds of critical, specific stances, AI doesn't do that well. And probably because it is leaning into, like you said, this very homogenized, what is the most agreed upon position, the least objectionable position, and people don't like to be told they're wrong. So I guess it's kind of leaning into trying not to do that.
Objectivity is not really something any single person can attain. That's the whole problem with journalism. People are like, well, journalism can't be objective. It's always presenting a perspective. But the goal of journalism is to aim for objectivity. But with AI, it's kind of like trying to be the least controversial, the most consensus driven. And sometimes you need, with a journalist, you need a journalist to probe and say, well, what about this thing that a lot of people are concerned about, which AI wouldn't do.
And I think the other big thing that stands out to me about AI is that it doesn't actually think. It's not like a person processing through all of this information and taking in new positions and new evidence and synthesizing them and coming up with a revised position. It's just going on frequency data. It's basically saying, based on all of the information that I have been trained on, this is what I think is the most likely word to follow this other word. So it's basically, you've given it keywords in your search term or in your question. It's going through its training data and saying, like, what are the things that I know that come up connected to that word? Let me just spit those out. Whereas people on the internet and students in their writing are actually thinking about things and responding based on their real life experiences. We are not just predictive text mechanisms. It's one of the things that I think is maybe a little bit like overstated or overhyped about AI, is that, you know, there's all these promises about what it will deliver, and it's like, well, it doesn't think. It's not a person. It doesn't have that capacity for critical thought that we all have.
Yeah, and I mean, I really think people need to realize, like, I mean, there are different AI out there, but if you're dealing with a single AI that's looked at all this data collectively and, you know, interpreted all this stuff, it's got all these probabilities and statistics going, and it's still a single voice. And so I saw an interview with Elon Musk where he was saying, well, I want to build an AI that is, you know, truth oriented. But a single voice, it's very difficult to have a single voice be truth oriented, because every single voice has its own perspective, has its own framing, has its own truth. And the only way that we get closer to truth is by all of us, if, you know, collectively saying, like, well, here's this angle on it, and here's this angle on it, and here's this angle, and, you know, all the angles together get us further down the line towards something approaching a truth. But I think that's where really humanities and an education that involves humanities shines, because, you know, the world is not a simple place. You know, the social systems that we exist in are extremely complex, but also all the physical systems, everything. These are very complex systems, and it's impossible to simplify that in a way that, you know, we can function. And, you know, you just can't filter out all these other variables as if they don't exist. They're there, you know, and so one little change here is going to affect everything over here. And AI, you know, as much as it can process and as much as it is able to sort of be trained on and incorporate into its perspective, it's still based on statistics, which is all about reduction and all about simplicity and all about, again, what is the most likely thing?
And it's hard to, even from just a language perspective, language is messy. Language is so caught up in all of our different identities, and the way that we communicate is going to shift depending on which identities we want to highlight, who we're talking to, what the context is. And it's that level of nuance that AI is not particularly good about. I tried asking it to, like, draft an email the other day, and it gave me this very formal, this would be so weird and so stilted if I sent this to a colleague. And so I was like, make it a little more informal. And then it was like a casual, super, like, it's not getting to that nuance and granularity of, like, I have this positionality in the world and this is the context in which I'm sending this email. It's really bad at those kinds of messy levels of nuance that humans embody and that humanities are so interested in looking at and shining lights on.
Yeah, it's dealing in averages and, you know, again, likelihoods, probabilities. So it's like quantitative research, which has its value. You know, quantitative research has a lot of value. I do quantitative research, but you miss out on every edge case, you know, and it's the edge cases where the brilliant insight comes from. And the humanities are focused on the edge cases and focused on, you know, really, like, you know, a historian looking at that one moment in history that changed the world. You know, the whole world was shifted on that one moment. You know, AI would be like, oh, that moment wasn't important. It was really, like, you know, whatever. So it's not able to identify the way a human would, where that, you know, where the significance is. And they put a little bit of randomness in. If there was no randomness built into the AI, it would spit out the same exact thing to the same query every time. So they throw a little randomness in there just to be like, to kind of trick us into being like, oh, I'm talking with a person who occasionally says random things, right? So to me, it's almost like an optical illusion. It's like it's It's like we're looking at a flat screen and it looks like it's moving, but it's not, or a flat piece of paper that looks like it's moving because of the arrows and the circles, but it's not moving. And so this is like, it looks like it's thinking, but it's not thinking. It looks like it's processing, but I mean, I guess it's a computer processing on some level, but it's not thinking the way that a human thinks, and it's not intelligent. There's no wisdom for sure. It's really a misnomer to call it intelligence.
This is one of the ways that I think in some ways humanities has, as a field of study, we have an advantage in that rarely are we just asking students to summarize things. Usually there is some element of critical response, or connect these two pieces of writing, or connect this reading to contemporary events that are happening today, or some level of critical thought that AI is not really capable of. And I think that's maybe one advantage that humanities have, is that, by nature of the field, we're asking you to delve into these difficult, complicated conversations and to think about the information beyond just, here's what this author said. So I'm not that like assignments are automatic in humanities are automatically AI proof, but I do think there's, by nature of what we're generally asking students to do, there's a little bit of, it makes it harder for them to use AI and go undetected. Yeah.